kami yang bersemangat merdeka!
Lee Kuan Yew braced himself early on in life to face history's tumultuous tides full on. From the hardships of war, with a fledgling nation in tow, he leapfrogged decades, pushing past history's disruptive currents. He survived its undertow and brought Singapore to where it is today without letting time nor tide deter him. Lee Kuan Yew was the eldest son of Kuan Yew and Lee Chin-kun. An excellent student who earned himself a place in Cambridge to read law, he proved to be the sibling that his sister and 3 brothers could look up to. As the eldest brother, he took care of the family during the Japanese occupation and already showed entrepreneurial and survival instincts. His younger sibling shared how this benefited the family.
She knew that the banana money, we called it at that time, when the war was over, will be of very little value. And he purposely bought many things so that when the war was over, he'll dispose of them and convert them to Swiss currency. And during the period when he bought the billiard table, we had a lot of fun.
While Lee was Western educated and English was the primary language he spoke at home, he subscribed to Confucian values. In particular, the importance of family, community and country, and one's duty to others.
He's really a wonderful brother because as an older brother, he was really a responsible person, very wise, and always willing to give advice to us. At any time we will say we'd like to meet him, and he'll say, sure, come over.
A driven student himself, he expected his siblings to share his work ethic and advised his youngest brother to buck up and study hard if he wanted to do medicine in England, advice he took seriously.
He said, if you want to go to England to do medicine, you've got to study very hard because it's very competitive. It's not competitive in Singapore, but it's very competitive in the UK. And at the rate I was going, he said, you had better buck up and study hard. I think that's all he had to tell me, and it just clicked. And I said, yeah, maybe I've not been pushing myself. I should really give more effort and so on. And it paid dividends.
Growing up, Lee was particular about respecting another's belongings. He'd be furious if his brothers borrowed his things without asking.
One day, my second brother, Dennis, used his pair of shoes without his permission and enjoyed using it. But when he returned it, he didn't clean it or something. And Big Brother was very furious with him. And we all heard about it. And there was no end of that story. And from that day on, all of us knew that we must not touch his things unless we got permission to use his things. But he's not selfish in that. You can use his things, but he feels that you must ask his permission and then return it as you found it.
Such principles stood him in good stead when he entered politics and devoted his life to creating a better Singapore, not just for his family and friends, but for his fellow citizens. This devotion, though, robbed him of time with his family.
So he made special effort to make sure that there's always a dinner together. And that will be New Year's Eve dinner. We always make sure that we get together. Or birthdays. If he's got time, he'll make sure that we get together for birthday dinners.
Lee was always protective of his sister Monica, who remembers their home being constantly filled with her brother's friends.
I have 4 brothers, and the 4 brothers have got about average of 12 friends each. So when they come and go, it's like Grand Central Station, and everybody comes in and out. This main door is never shut, right until midnight. Even our main gates, we never shut.
Sharing the warm camaraderie was former Cabinet Minister Hon Swee Sen.
Hon Swee Sen, a very close friend of my brother. So whenever he feels like coming down from Penang, he stays with us. Yeah.
It was clear that family and friends occupied an important place in Lee's life. He was grateful for the support they gave him when he entered politics. Hon was not only Lee's cabinet colleague, but someone he wrote and spoke about fondly. Hon died in 1983, and in a parliamentary debate on ministers' salaries, Lee spoke about how the first-generation leadership, including Hon, was driven by their passion to build a corruption-free, performance-driven civil service, something he felt you can't put a price on.
I gave Dr. Goh the best bump sack we had, Hon Swee Sen, to help him. Very quiet man, doesn't make great speeches, but understands people and knows who can do what. You can bring him back to life and reward him.
Singapore's first foreign minister, S. Rajaratnam, was both friend and wordsmith to Lee, and counted among the close friends that Lee made during the early political years.
Oh, I think he was, personally to me, I mean, he was a very great friend and a very warm-hearted one. And he gives hard when in nearly hopeless situations. When you feel that the position, God, this is so bleak, he says, never mind, let's soldier on. We got to fight. And I think that was a very great quality to have in a leader.
There was a special bond between Lee and his PAP comrades. History had unified them against the difficult challenges that the early days of nationhood brought. The battles against the communists and communalists shaped a special camaraderie which they never forgot.
Some of the founding members of the PAP, I mean the first few members who took up Member Cup, are still alive today. He's very close to them, and of course they are very close to him. Those who are closer to him, the resident leaders, will know that he cares for them. And otherwise, he will, the kind of support that he gets, it's not just a warm support; it's overwhelming support.
Amongst Lee's close friends, none were closer than one Kuan Yew, the woman behind the man. Kuan Yew caught Lee's attention as a teenager because she had scored higher marks than him in an exam. She was a recipient of the Queen's Scholarships, a government scheme which enabled 2 promising students each year to enroll at a British university. From rivalry, the relationship blossomed into love during the war years. He helped her get a place at Girton College in Cambridge so she could be with him while he read law at Fitzwilliam House. Unconventional at the time, they married secretly in England without the knowledge of their parents. After returning to Singapore, Lee sought and obtained blessings from his wife's father, and the couple was finally able to seal their union publicly.
So you either have the Western view, you marry the woman you love, or the Eastern view, you love the woman you marry. Well, I tried to match both. And I think it wasn't a bad choice.
Chu, as he fondly called her, was Lee's confidant, someone whose judgment and views he valued. Lee was seldom seen without her, whether at home or overseas.
They had a partnership. It was not a relationship of, a superior and an inferior. And in many senses, he took counsel from my mother and respected her views. And I think they had a very open relationship. It's sometimes difficult to do. I think all of us struggle to have, relationships take a lot of work to nurture, and I think they did it very well.
He took her advice and her views very seriously. I mean, on policy matters and government matters, he decided with the ministers, but she had her views of the people. She had her views on how he presented himself, how it came across. And I think they made sense, and he took them in. And when you are married a long time in a good marriage, you become in a way more like one another. In their case, I think the personalities were very contrasting. So I don't think even in old age they were like one another, but they were very, very compatible.
Many observed the close bond between the couple through their interactions with them. The Lees exemplified the importance of family values and the lifelong bonds of marriage.
She's a great source of support for him. I'm sure she contributes as much to the thinking of some of his speeches and his remarks. And she's a contributor to some of the discussions he has. But what is amazing about them is they're constantly in conversation. Some of us wonder, what is it that they're talking about? But they seem to be engaged and seem to be enjoying it.
He had a very special, close relationship with his wife, something which should be an inspiration to all of us. She lived for him. On some overseas trips, I overheard her telling the staff, because MM would have his own meetings, then they would bring her out, maybe to see some things or to do some shopping. And she told the staff, when MM is back, I want to be back.
On 26th October 2003, Mrs. Lee suffered a stroke while she and Lee were in London. In an interview, Lee gave a glimpse of how their lives changed after the stroke and how he personally devoted himself to her well-being. He read her poems by her bedside and took to meditation to relieve the stress of coping with her deteriorating health.
in spite of his own frailty, he was doing his very best to care for her. He spoke about how every evening he would spend, an hour or more beside her bed, talking to her, reading her the news and her favorite poems. And because she couldn't talk, he was finding it quite taxing to do that. And so I realized that he was already feeling the pain of separation from his wife. And he thought that perhaps the practice of meditation will help him to cope with that challenge of caring for her in her condition.
Mrs. Lee died in October 2010. His pain at her passing was evident to the entire nation.
Without her, I would have been a different man and a completely different life. She devoted herself to me and our children. She was always there when I needed her. She has lived a life full of warmth and meaning. I should find solace at the 89 years of a life well lived. But at this moment of the final parting, my heart is heavy with sorrow and grief.
The chief ideologue of the Chinese Communist Party, Deng Bijian, had over the years developed a personal friendship with the Lees. He arranged for a renowned photographer to take portraits of the Lees when they visited China. A few years later, in 2010, Lee got in touch with him.
他的夫人过世了呢，他很想念她。他希望能够把这个照片呢，还有当然还有同时照的还有几张了，不同的角度啊，大体相同了。那么希望在每一个房间，他的每个房间都布置有他夫人的以及他同夫人合影的照片，这种感觉。
Mrs. Lee's last wish was to have her ashes placed together with Lee's, so they'd be joined in death as they'd been in life. The Lees had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. All 3 excelled in their studies and were effectively bilingual, thanks to the importance their father placed on learning both the English language and one's mother tongue. They were president scholars who later distinguished themselves in their careers. The eldest son, Hsien Loong, became Prime Minister in 2004. Like his parents, he was educated at the University of Cambridge, where he studied mathematics and computer science, excelling at both. Lee Hsien Loong fondly recalls how father and son kept in touch during his Cambridge days, like they used to when he was a boy.
He spent a lot of trouble keeping in touch with us. When we were away, he would write to us. And my mother would write to us every week, and I would write back. And my mother's letter would be handwriting. His letter would be dictated, typed, and then there's typed double or triple space, and then he would go through and correct the typed version, and then add stuff and maybe have another paragraph or two at the end in writing, and then he'll send it to me in that form. And I mean, to think of the effort which it makes, and it's substantial pieces, maybe 5, 6 pages, maybe more. I still have them all stored away somewhere.
Lee's youngest child, Sen Yang, who also studied at Cambridge, became the Chief Executive Officer of Singtel.
People think of him as being very stern and very strict. I don't think we ever felt that at home. I think he himself felt that he had a very strict father who'd, often been quick to discipline the children, and so he did not do that with us.
Daughter Wei Ling became a medical doctor and the director of Singapore's National Neuroscience Institute. She travelled with the Lees in the early years, but remained shy of the limelight. Her columns, written for the Straits Times, opened a door into the private world of Lee and his family, shedding light on his dedication to the country and its citizens. In one article, she recalled how her father, though unwell, insisted on attending his constituency National Day dinner, which he never missed, especially since they were going to announce the establishment of a new preschool aimed at helping children develop a natural love for Mandarin. She wrote, "My father is obsessed with a number of things he believes are fundamental to Singapore's well-being, but nothing more so than education and bilingualism. At the age of 90, he still has daily lessons with a string of tutors to improve his Mandarin." Lee devoted time to his young children, despite affairs of state constantly demanding his attention.
When I was very small, he used to take us to go and look at trains. And we used to go to Tanglin Halt. There used to be a railway station there. And we would go there in the evenings and watch a train come, and the rail exchange tokens with the station master, and then it goes on. It's a great thrill and outing for us, for me. I was very small then, must have been 5, 6 years old max.
However important family was to him, Lee was ever mindful of his responsibilities as a leader. On a trip to South Africa, he and Mrs. Lee received news that his son, Lee Hsien Loong, then the Deputy Prime Minister, had cancer.
He was very distressed. He could not sleep. He had to take Valium. But when he met the South Africans, when he met journalists, you could not tell. Mrs. Lee, of course, was as a mother, was devastated. But the camera was not on her, it was on him. So among ourselves, he did talk to us about the diagnosis, the prognosis, the probabilities. And what he should do in terms of the deployment of younger leaders for the future. After Cape Town, we drove along the scenic route to Port Elizabeth or something. And as we crossed the mountain pass, we stopped for a rest, and there was a beautiful view of the Atlantic Ocean. The journalist asked for a group photograph, which MM cheerfully agreed to. And he asked his wife to join us. The wife could not. He tried to persuade her, she said no. Those of us who knew what was in her heart. But he kept up the pretense until the matter came out after he left South Africa. So watching him those few days, and the anguish he must have felt as a father, I was really moved by the override. It reminds me of this Chinese character Ren, of the knife's edge on your heart, and maintaining appearances nonetheless.
When you needed him, he was there. At a crisis, he was a key person in the family. So if you have when I was ill with lymphoma, or when my wife died, you depend on him for support. Not just what he says, but just being there and knowing that things will be okay.
All the time, the expectation goes up and up and up.
And I hope
Lee was well known for his exacting standards. Standards he set not only for others, but for himself as well.
Starting from the home, in the schools, in the workshops.
His sheer determination to master languages beyond English testified to this. Eager to connect with the Chinese electorate, he learned Mandarin, and continued doing so well into his 90s. Dr. Chu Chenghai was one of his tutors.
文章我念一遍，他要念一遍。他语音错了，我给他改正，他也跟着改正。他的造句错了，告诉他，他也录音下来，那么跟着改正。所以换句话说呢，在学习的时候，你发现他非常认真。
Tapi komunis tak boleh masuk.
Lee's command of the Malay language was also impressive. Being Peranakan, he had a good grasp of Malay and spoke it as a native speaker would. Yet, he took Malay lessons to get even better at it.
Siapa yang patut, siapa yang baik, siapa yang suci hati, dia yang menang.
My brother is always busy about languages. First it was Hokkien, then it was Malay, then became Mandarin. So even when we are on holidays in Cameron Highlands, he gets up at 6 in the morning and has a voice training himself.
Lee was also disciplined about his health, eating 5 light meals a day and exercising regularly.
He says every day when I come to the office, I do not sit down for prolonged periods. After a while, I would get up and I would come to this bicycle. I would turn on the BBC radio to listen to the news, and then I would cycle. And that's how I keep my weight in check.
Get the people of Singapore, help me teach you.
Beyond discipline, he believed in integrity. He warned his team never to leave things to chance. They knew where he drew the line and were clear about the sobering consequences that would follow should they ever cross it.
One advice that he gave was, not just to me, but to the ministers as well, is never be held a hostage to fortune. In other words, you've got to conduct your life in such a way that your opponents cannot seize upon those skeletons in the cupboard or scandals and so on and just sort of destroy you.
Lee valued a simple and frugal lifestyle, values that influenced the way he lived and how he ran his government. Those who worked with him remember how careful he was with money. Sidek Sanef recalls the time he had to travel to China where the temperature was minus 18 degrees. Lee asked him if he had winter wear.
Then he asked me, do you have a boot to cover your shoes so they walk, over the snow, whatever it is, safer and so forth? I said, yeah, I'll buy. I'll get $400, $500 alone, I'll buy. Oh, don't waste money, don't waste money. He said, pause a while, and he said, Chotong has a good boot. He may be thinking he was so quite tall, even though as I am now, Go Chotong is taller, much taller than I.
So I end up going to China with borrowed overcoat and borrowed borrowed boot.
In planning for Singapore's future, Lee Kuan Yew was not driven by rigid ideology or dogma. He was prepared to change his position when it was warranted, like overturning the stop-at-two family planning policy and allowing for casinos as part of the integrated resorts. His sheer determination to push through projects and ideas he thought valuable sometimes led others to have a wrong impression of Lee.
There is this misperception that Mr. Lee does not listen to other people's views. He surrounds himself in the cabinet and public service by yes men. But in fact, if you agreed with everything he says, then he would not respect you, because he will find that you're not very useful to him. He wants to hear contrarian views, and he's prepared to accept views that are different from his, provided you gave very good reasons and good grounds.
The higher the ministers are paid.
The leader of the opposition often did not agree with Lee, but gives him due credit for his achievements.
The legacy which I think Mr. Lee has left for Singapore is social integration. We have succeeded through, over the years, that all races, regardless of language or religion, to be able to coexist and to live together peacefully. And not only that, we're beginning to see the integration and sense of nationhood and a national identity evolving and emerging regardless of race. I think it's a marked achievement.
Consumed with a zeal to keep Singapore relevant, he obsessed about spotting the right talent for Singapore's future leaders. That Singapore had seen 2 successful generational changes of government without disruption is testament to the care and value he placed on succession planning. Deputy Prime Minister Teo Chee Hean remembers his first meeting with Lee.
Well, it's etched forever in my memory. I was 18 years old. My colleague and I, Peter Ho, had just commissioned as infantry officers. One day, we were told to report to the Istana. And after waiting a while, we were told that the PM wanted to see us. And before we could collect our thoughts, we found ourselves in his office in front of him. And he said to us, he said, "Young man, I would like you to give the Navy a try. You will give the Navy a try, won't you?" So, as 18-year-olds, what do you say? Both of us said, "Yes, sir." And the next thing we knew, we were, out of his office. And here he was, the PM. He must have had many things on his mind. But he paid attention to the build-up of the Navy. He called up 2 18-year-old young men to try to meet these organizational needs of the Navy. I found that quite remarkable.
Also always on Lee's mind was the well-being of Singaporeans, so much of what he did was to help improve their lives. Lee had been a Member of Parliament for Tanjung Pagar from 1955. For over 50 years, he built a strong rapport with his grassroots leaders and residents. Lee's constituents knew that they could expect to meet him on at least 3 occasions every year: National Day, Chinese New Year, and Tree Planting Day. Even illness would not stop him from showing up. Their welcome was always warm, appreciating how seriously he took these visits.
People love him, people adore him. He's like a superstar here, but it's not just that kind of celluloid superstar, but you know, the affectionate leader that people felt that because of Lee Kuan Yew, they are having a good life in Singapore.
Where the Pinnacle now stands, there used to be 2 old blocks of flats. Grassroots activist Chu Wai-fu remembers an incident that took place when these flats were being built decades ago that said much about Lee's character.
后来有一个代表去跟他谈了，以前呢，我们一些同志啊，住在这边的啊，住在旧楼上，拿了这个新屋子了，可以优先呢给他们特别考虑呢。他就讲说，你要想想看呢，我们这种屋子啊是建给人民大众、公众人士的啦。假如我们建的这屋子只是唯一的给我们的党员的话，我们看起来我们的党是没有前途的啦，是吧？ 人民怎么样会相信我们呢？所以他这种都是为自己的。
He took a lot of pains to attend to the personal side of things. People write him notes, he takes the trouble to respond. People who have served in the past, he takes trouble to keep up. And if he hears that somebody is unwell, for example, he would take the trouble to write notes. There's a very personal touch. He takes a lot of trouble to keep up with.
Many of Singapore's older citizens would readily acknowledge Lee as the father of the nation, having seen his leadership tide them through difficult times. But Lee worried that today's youth, spared from the birth pangs of a new nation, would see the world through the lens of plenty and take Singapore's unique circumstances for granted.
It is necessary for people like you and your generation to understand that this is not a business of just voting or not voting. That politics has got to do with your life, your job, your home, your Medicare, your children's future. Suppose it goes wrong. You don't need to go to do political science to know that something has gone wrong, right? You haven't thought through the problem. Think over it carefully, and then you ask me a question the next time we meet.
Thanks a lot, sir.
University graduate Muhammad Farooq Osman had only one encounter with Lee at a forum in 2011 held at the Nanyang Technological University. Farooq had been inspired whilst a student in junior college to write Lee a letter after reading his memoirs.
I was fascinated by his strength of character and forceful personality. And although I didn't agree with everything he said in his memoirs, I think that this is a man which, after all, has contributed, has given his whole adult life to Singapore. And so I wanted to write him a thank you letter.
The future was where Lee always set his sights. He and his team worked hard to set Singapore on a trajectory of success. He obsessed about leadership succession, believing that one's success is measured by the success of one's replacement.
And now, the most difficult part is how to manage this transition. It's not simply just to govern. To govern is simple. But to let the second generation govern is very difficult, is very delicate. Because if it goes wrong, I'm still responsible. If the ball gets shot into the goal, I'm the goalkeeper. My fear, my reservation was...
By the 1988 general election, it was clear he was ready to hand over the reins to a successor generation.
He was not hungry for power. He prepared a leadership transition. When he was ready, he stepped aside, let a new Prime Minister take over, and made sure that Singapore would always have leadership. So when he passed away, there was no leadership vacuum. Who can replace Mr. Lee? Nobody.
This time you are casting your vote not in judgment over my performance, because I did not make the decisions. You are casting your vote to give your verdict on the performance of Goh Chok Tong and his younger colleagues. For 4 years, they have made all the major decisions. Yes, I presided over the cabinet meetings, but even where I disagreed with them, I have not overruled them.
On November 28, 1990, Lee stepped down from his post as Prime Minister. Though still capable of leading the country, he chose to make way for a younger generation led by Goh Chok Tong.
I, Goh Chok Tong, having been appointed to the office of Prime Minister, do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Republic of Singapore, and that I will preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of the Republic of Singapore.
Goh Chok Tong was chosen by the younger generation of ministers to be their leader.
I thought that he was a very good teacher because he wanted the younger ministers to succeed. And since I was chosen by the younger ministers to become the successor to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, I mean, he helped me to learn as much as I could, to impart his own knowledge, and maybe to influence me, so that, when I became Prime Minister, I would be able to continue with his own policies. But basically, is to exchange views and so on. Then we built up a comfortable relationship. And when I became Prime Minister, of course, he was very good. He gave me all the respect which he should give to a Prime Minister.
Lee was the first of his generation of political leaders to successfully take up the challenge of leadership, and the last to relinquish the burden. After stepping down as Prime Minister, he continued in cabinet for many more years, first as senior minister during the premiership of Goh Chok Tong, then minister mentor when his son Lee Hsien Loong took over as Prime Minister. In his new roles, Lee continued to be active in the international arena, championing Singapore wherever he went, even after stepping down from the cabinet in 2011. Many leaders across the globe were full of admiration for the man.
He's a really clear thinker. And I think, the single most important attribute, and something he certainly taught me, is the need to get to the right analysis, shorn of dogma. Right, leave all that aside. You may be on the left, you may be on the right, you may have this preconception or that preconception. Put it all to the side, and the first thing you work out is what actually would make the difference to your country and improve it. And in that's why I think, although he was a 20th century leader, he's a very 21st century teacher.
He could teacher that when I meet him, I have to take out my notebook and write. I wrote what he said, and he was not offended, and he even tried to speak clearly and slowly so that I can get everything. This is the nature of a teacher.
He is somebody singular. A very quick mind, an analytical mind, sharp judgment, and on the other hand, in the fields in which he has to operate, he is a very pragmatic man, not driven by any particular ideology. More or less is he a man of reason rather than of ideology.
Whatever the future holds, Lee Kuan Yew's place in history is certain. He led a remarkable life, appraising his circumstances with objectivity, while remaining always true to his values and beliefs. He said, "Why do I want to live my life all over again? I may not be as lucky a second time in so many things. All I can say is, I did my best. What people think of it, I have to leave it to them." And of his accomplishments, he simply said, "What I have to show for all my work is Singapore, and Singapore is still working."
What will we miss of him? I think so many things, but the most important, I think the key thing is that with him, you will not lose. You will be all right, and you will come through. And that sense of confidence and that trust in a person, because of the experience, what he has gone through, because of what he has done, because of what he has contributed and demonstrated, is not something which you can replicate. He was unique. He played a unique role in Singapore, and I think we've been very lucky to have him.
If Singaporeans were to look back at their country's beginnings, they'd have to concur that very little was on their side, least of all, luck. Instead, straining against the odds was one man with the courage, fortitude, and sheer audacity to reach for the impossible.
You must be prepared to have bones broken and blood spilled. There are sometimes no way out.
He rallied a nation with a dream.
30 years ago, my colleagues, younger, more dreamy-eyed, settled the words of our pledge. We did not focus our eyes on our neighbors, or we would have missed that rainbow in the sky. We pursued that rainbow. And that was how we came to build today's Singapore.
Of his life, Lee said, "I cannot say I planned my life. That's why I feel life is a great adventure, exciting, unpredictable, and at times exhilarating." Lee's political genius swept Singaporeans along the arduous but rewarding journey of hope and discovery. His courageous spirit continues to inspire Singaporeans, young and old, to take their country towards an even more meaningful tomorrow. A fledgling nation, once floundering, now claims its place among the world's most modern, all within the lifetime of an indomitable leader.
For the young, let me tell you, the sky has turned brighter. There's a glorious rainbow that beckons those with the spirit of adventure. And there are rich findings at the end of that rainbow.
To the young and to the not so old, I say, look at that horizon. Follow that rainbow. Go ride it.